From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. In the studio with me is Dr. Robert P. Jones, founding president of the Public Religion Research Institute. Okay, Robbie, you've done another fascinating study. This one probably could get you in as much trouble as any you've done.
But it's a lot of fun.
It's particularly timely as Americans turn their eyes toward New Orleans this weekend, and a remarkable number of sports fans will turn their eyes heavenward as others of us look toward New Orleans. Why did you do this?
Well, we're thinking about sports as, and particularly I think the Super Bowl has become really a kind of national ritual. I mean, you think about the kinds of things we talk about when we talk about sports and fans. We talk about trials and tribulations. We talk about prayer. We talk about devotion.
We take communion.
We take communion, right? There's ritual, right? There's ritual dress. There's face painting. There are icons, otherwise known as mascots. I mean, there are kind of all of this kind of religious overtones, I think, to kind of this nationally communal event of sports. And in fact, when we asked here, 2/3 of Americans say they're going to tune into the Super Bowl this Sunday. 2/3 of the country. That's really a lot. You compare that, only 38% tuned into the inauguration, right? So we're talking about a lot of people here tuning in on a Sunday. There'll be sermons that'll be taking, illustrations about the Super Bowl as their congregants' minds are on the game. So we decided to kind of get underneath it. And we've also seen a lot of players in professional sports who will either before the game, after the game, during the game, either do a religious sort of gesture on the field that everyone understands as a kind of tribute to God. They'll wear T-shirts with Bible verses imprinted on them. They'll thank God or Jesus, after the game in their press conference. So there's a lot of kind of overt, not just kind of indirect, but overt religiosity in sports. And we want to kind of get a sense of what Americans thought about all of that, and whether they thought God had a stake in the game.
Well, I mean, I'm not a pollster, and I'm talking off the top of my head, but my experience is that more people talk about God who won than talk about God who lost.
In retrospect, Providence always works this way, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then I wonder about what the issue really is. Is it the team who wins? Is that because of how many people were praying for them to win and it was more than the others? Or is it about how pious the players are?
Right. Well, we asked about both.
Well, what did you find?
Well, it's interesting that we found that many more people think that God rewards, for example, athletes who have faith with good health and success in their careers. So 53% of Americans say that God rewards athletes who have faith with good health and success in their careers. Now, fewer than that, but still a significant number. 27% of Americans say that God plays a role in determining which team wins sporting events. So this is a very eminent, active, God in the world that's not only sort of thinking about which teams are going to win, but is actually helping individual athletes who have faith and demonstrate their faith on the field.
So God may be kinder to more virtuous people when it comes to things like winning a game and staying healthy. Boy, that raises an interesting theodicy issue about people who get hurt, that it's not just that they got slammed, but God had something against them. I have to ask, are there significant demographic differences in the response on this?
There are, yeah, as most things in America. What's interesting here is that we have the divides here are not what you see in politics, right? So they're not Democrat, Republican, and we see some of that. But we have, for example, two groups that are heavily entrenched in the Democratic Party and heavily entrenched in the Republican Party, having very similar views on this issue. So minority Christians, who are kind of part of the base of the Democratic Party, white evangelical Christians, who are the base of the Republican Party, So minority Christians, 7 in 10, 72% say that God rewards athletes who have faith with good health and success. White evangelical Christians, 67%. I mean, these are very, very close numbers. And on the issue of teams, about 4 in 10 of each. 4 in 10, 40% of minority Christians say God plays a role in determining which team wins sporting events. White evangelical Christians, 38%. All right, so these are the two most likely groups who have very different political outlooks, but when it comes to God's involvement in sports, have very, very similar outlooks.
I don't know whether to be happy about that or sad about that.
You're looking for common ground. We just found it. Right?
I don't know whether you've seen this or not, but the new Sports Illustrated has a very interesting cover story on Christians and athletes. In fact, the writer wonders out loud if there are any non-Christian players in the NFL.
Yeah.
A few years ago in this studio, I talked by phone with the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He thought that he was on a traditional religious radio program. And so he made a statement which I challenged him on and went back and asked. I said, did you just say that a Christian athlete is a better athlete for being Christian? And he said, yes, we can prove that.
My favorite saying is, football doesn't build character, it reveals it. And I believe people's characters come out when it's really a tough, tense time. And I've been around those who claim to be Christians in tough, tense times, like Tony Dungy. And I've watched his Christian character come out. And I've also been around men and women who claim to be, highly moral people and in tough times. And I can tell you this, there's a difference. And the difference is Jesus Christ in their life.
Now, that's the kind of thinking that you were running into there.
Yeah, no, I would think our polling would say that there's a lot of Americans who, who agree with that sentiment here. And, I think you're right. We also see, just kind of take this down one more level, not surprisingly, it correlates pretty well with the religious breaks here, but there's regional breaks in the country. So people in the South, the Midwest, are much more likely to believe this than the West and the Northeast, which may make you think that the two teams in the Super Bowl are maybe out of luck, right? Because the people who believe this most strongly are actually in the South and the Midwest, not where these two teams are from.
So they may both lose.
Maybe. Right? So, I don't know.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And this is actually a serious – well, no, I want to ask you one other before I do that. So on the basis of your poll, who's going to win?
We were unfortunately in the field before we knew who the last two teams were, so we don't have like a play on kind of who the most religious Americans think is going to win. We don't have that number, unfortunately.
Well, God will reveal that on Sunday.
That's right. We will know on Sunday.
Okay, here's the serious question.
Yep.
Are there areas of American life beyond sports where this kind of thinking can be expanded to, where people are rooting for their team, whatever that team is, and figure it has earned divine intervention? Do you see that in other places?
Well, I think we see it to some extent in some of the questions we've asked before about the U.S. is the place of America in the world, right? That there is a kind of American team, and when you see the bumper stickers say "God bless America," those sorts of things. I mean, I think that we saw a lot in the last decade since 9/11. It does raise a whole host of questions about well, if God's for America, what does that mean about Britain and Russia and Iran and Afghanistan? Is God also for those countries as well? But there is a sense that a large number of Americans think that God has really put America on the planet at this time in history to accomplish a very specific purpose in the world. And it's kind of part of kind of manifest destiny kinds of thinking. I would say that on this subject it's probably a little less serious than that, but I do think that there is this sense of if you have a view of a very immanent God who's active in the world and a very personal God. I mean, that's the other thing I think that separates minority Christians and white evangelical Christians, say, from their Catholic and mainline brethren, is that they have a much more personal view of God that's intimately involved with every detail of their lives, right? And so if that's where your theological starting point is, it's much easier to connect it to a whole range of things. But as you say, when you read the book of Job or other kind of places when you run out up against things like Newtown, which we were talking about earlier, it's hard to reconcile sometimes that kind of thing. Or if your team loses in the Super Bowl, it requires some quick thinking on your feet to kind of reconcile those beliefs, I think, with certain outcomes.
Well, Robbie, I have to tell you, you have an absolute knack for putting a human face on the statistics you compile.
Oh, thanks.
But actually, this one kind of does it all by itself. The Public Religion Research Institute has released a survey of American views on divine intervention in athletic competitions, and you got to take a look at it, see what this new survey says, how you view the results of this survey. Go to the website publicreligion.org. It's always great stuff, Robbie, and I want to thank you for coming on today to share it with us here on State of Belief Radio.
Thanks, Welton, for having me.